Hello everyone, my name is Sadie and I am studying modern and medieval languages and linguistics at Cambridge University at Corpus Christi College. I'm a first year student and I'm doing post A-level Spanish and French. And today I'm going to be giving you a subject taster of what sort of my typical work on an essay might be. So I'm going to share my screen now. Um, I hope you can all see this. So it's just loading. Okay, so yeah, I'm doing modern medieval languages and linguistics, which basically is a long way of saying that I study languages. So as I said, I'm doing French and Spanish, both post A level, and yeah, I'm just going to be doing a little bit of a subject taster. So first of all, I'm going to talk through sort of general stuff like what my week would look like. And then I'm going to go into more specifically a French text that we study and how sort of a very boring French text can actually be quite interesting and you can look at some really interesting themes. So a little bit about the degree. I know that a lot of this information will be online, but when I was looking at Cambridge, I didn't really find that there was much about what a week would look like. So obviously this will vary depending on the languages you do. Um, but this is what my week will usually look like. I will have 2 grammar classes a week, one for Spanish and one for French, both lasting an hour. I'll have 2 oral classes a week, again, one for each language, one lasting an hour. For the grammar classes, there'll usually be worksheets or maybe like 200-word short essay kind of things to write. Well, short essay, 200 words is kind of like a big paragraph. And then for the oral classes, what we'll usually do is we'll read an article. It could be from anything to do with euthanasia to riots that might be going on, and then we'll talk about that article and what's going on in the oral class. And then a translation class a week. It alternates each week depending on the language. So one week it will be French, then the next it will be Spanish. And then also have an essay supervision each week, and that basically means it's me and a friend on my course, and we talk about our essays with our supervisor. It's really good. I really enjoy the essay supervisions because you can really talk about some themes that maybe you couldn't talk about in your essays. And again, it will be alternate each week depending on the language. And then critical theory class every other week. Critical theory is basically where you talk about different theories in literature. So, for example, last week we talked about film and feminism. So, we talked about how different camera angles and the different ways of filming can be quite sexist and objectifying of women. So that's quite an interesting thing, and we do loads of other things as well. Like we've done stuff on Orientalism, colonialism, things like that. So very interesting stuff. Um, okay, so I know that I don't know if any of you have looked at the reading list. You probably haven't because you just won't have needed to yet. Um, but often the reading list can be a bit daunting. I know that when I looked at the reading list, I was like, oh my gosh, what on earth is this? Like these books look so dull. And I feel like quite often that can be something that will put students off applying to Cambridge or Oxford, is because of how daunting the reading list looks and how dry it looks. And I will completely admit this reading list looks horrific, but I've written essays on every single one of these texts, and I can tell you that all of them were very interesting, and all of that I was able to pick something out of all of them that was really interesting. So I'm gonna try and dissect the reading list a bit for you guys, because I know that it can appear really dull and dry, but don't worry, it's really not. So this first one, the Les de Marie de France, that is a collection of long poems written by, published anonymously, but it's predicted to have been written by a woman in the 12th century. And within these poems, you can see a lot about queer theory and homosexuality. which is really interesting, and issues with gender. And if you think about this, that was written in the 12th century, and all the and how topical gender issues are now, it's quite amazing actually. Sorry, that was my phone. And then the next one, Les Amours by Pierre de Ronsard, is a collection of sonnets, love sonnets from this guy to this woman who he really loves. But within these poems and these sonnets, there's love, violence, and war, and it gets quite sort of dark and almost stalkery. So that's really interesting. And then the next one, Horace Corneille. It's actually a play, but you just read it as you normally would read a book. And it's very short. And again, this is very interesting because you can look about the role of women and kinship, because in this play, it's actually just the women on stage recounting the actions of men, which is really interesting because whilst women are portrayed as powerless within the play, when it's if you think about it being performed, they actually have all the power. So that's really interesting. And then the Discours sur l'origine et les fondements de l'inégalité parmi les hommes by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is a little bit different. It's sort of looking at so this guy Rousseau basically explores the origins of inequality, and he talks about something called the state of nature, which is before civilizations ever existed. So that's really interesting. You can look for reasons for inequality, and obviously there are lots of links you can make with this and today's world. So that's really interesting. And then we have Le Père Goriot by Balzac. This is super interesting. This is quite a long novel. This is probably my least favorite out of all of them, but it was still very interesting. You can look at paternalism and wealth, and you can also make lots of links with sort of Napoleon. If you're interested in history, there are lots of links you can make with historical context. And it's a nice story actually. It's sort of about this house in Paris, and the way these people's lives intertwine. It's sort of like a little mystery as well, with a bit of a plot twist. So it's actually a nice little read as well. And then finally, this is probably like up there with one of my favorites. This is actually a film by Agnès Varda, and it's called Cleo De Sanchez. This is really interesting because you can really talk about feminism and the male gaze, and it talks a lot about the objectification of women and feminism, and you can really pull out some really interesting themes from that. So whilst you might look at this reading list initially and be like, what on earth is this? When you actually look, when you actually come to study these texts, you can really pull out some interesting themes. And I think that's what I kind of want to show you today, is that a text is a lot more than just what you see on the reading list, and you can really pick out some good themes. So I would like to talk you through a specific text today. This was probably my favorite essay that I wrote this year, and I wouldn't have thought it would be, to be honest. So the text we're going to look at is the Les Deux Maries de France, the first one on the reading list. This is how it looks like. I've got the book here as well. And it's basically a collection of poems, but I mean, they're poems, but they are also short stories because they last like a few pages. And it's basically, so as I said before, it's published anonymously in the 12th century, supposedly written by women. They're pretty much certain it was written by a woman, which is obviously like amazing in itself, given the lack of female education. It's very cool. It comprises of several poems that recount various stories focusing on courtly love. However, within these stories, there are actually some very prominent themes of homosexuality and gender issues, which is really interesting. And you wouldn't really think by just looking at it. But we're going to look a little bit later at how these themes emerge within a specific lay, which is like a short story. So now I'm going to read a summary of the lay that we're going to look at. And if you want to find the summary yourself, I'll see if I can show you. I don't really. Okay, so if you want to find the summary yourself, I hope you can see. Go on Bisclavre. Summary in English. And it should be, yeah, grade saver, the Lady Marie de France. And there's a summary there and also an analysis if you want to have a look more at some themes. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint if I can manage that. And from the beginning. Okay, so there we go. So the lay we're going to be looking at is, as I said before, Bisclavre, which is werewolf in Old French. So I'm just going to read out the summary now, but you can skip forward if you want to read it in your own time. So Marie, she's the author, informs us she would be remiss to omit the lay of Bisclavre, a werewolf from the old days of Brittany. She speaks of the werewolf curse as something that often used to happen. She begins her tale by introducing a noble and handsome baron, Bisclavre, who is loved by all in his home realm of Brittany. He lives with his beautiful and loving wife, and all is well between them except for one thing. Each week, the Baron disappears for 3 days, and nobody knows where he goes. Finally, she is driven to confront him on one of his returns. She tells him she has a question that she fears to ask, and he promises to tell her anything she would know. However, when she poses her question about his disappearance, most frightened he might reveal the existence of another lover, he falters and asks her to withdraw her query, since the answer meant great harm would come to him, and he shall lose her love and destroy himself. She perseveres with her question and ultimately convinces him to reveal the truth. Each week, he becomes a werewolf. Though she lets on no sign of concern, she immediately begins to question him, learning in the process that he must unclothe himself to turn and that he must hide his clothing in order to facilitate his transformation. Without his clothes, he would remain a werewolf forever. He doesn't want to tell her where he hides his clothes, but when she insists, he reveals his hiding place in a hollow rock next to an old chapel deep in the woods. Maggie, the author, then reveals the wife's true feelings. She is disgusted and no longer wishes to lie with him. She begins to plot how to rid herself of the burden, and to that end contacts a knight who had always wanted her as a lover, but whose advances she had repudiated. She offers her love and body if he will steal Bisclavre's clothing. The knight agrees, and Bisclavre is seen no more. The lady marries the knight. Bisclavre's friends search for him a while, but when he is not found, all are forced to move on. A year passes, until one day, when the king is out hunting in the forest where Bisclavre disappeared, the hunting dogs come across the werewolf, and the hunters spend their day in pursuit of him, until they are upon him and about to kill him. However, Bisclavre, instead of fighting, rushes to the king and begs for mercy by kissing the lord's feet. Though frightened, the king is equally impressed with the obvious intelligence and humility in the creature and calls off the hunt. The king brings the wolf back to his castle, where the wolf becomes a favourite amongst all. The king orders it protected, and the wolf loves the king in turn. All of his men feed and guard it, and Bisclavre even sleeps each night amongst the knights. They have never seen anything quite like him. All is well until the king holds court and summons all of his vassals, one of whom is the knight who had married Bisclavre's wife. When the wolf sees the man, he launches an attack upon him, attempting to tear him apart. Bisclavre retreats when threatened by the king, but continues to attempt attacks until the festival has ended, which prompts such much suspicion amongst the king's men that the knight might have harmed the usually docile wolf in some way to inspire such hatred. Soon after, the king returns to hunt in the woods, and Bisclaveret accompanies them. That night, they take lodging in the area, and when Bisclaveret's wife hears of this, she decides the next day to visit the king and present a gift to him. When the wolf sees her approach, he launches at her and tears off her nose. He is barely restrained and is on the verge of being killed when a wise man points out to the king the connection between the two people who the wolf has attacked. They are married, and also that the woman was the wife of the much-loved Bisclaveret, who disappeared some time before. The wise man suggests the king question the wife, which he agrees to. Under torture, the now noseless wife confesses all that she has done, as well as her disbelief, as well as her belief that the wolf is her husband. The king demands that the woman return the clothes, which she does. However, the wolf barely acknowledges them until the wise man points out that he is likely humiliated to change in front of the king. Thus, the latter puts the wolf in his own bedroom with the clothing and returns soon after to find the human Bisclaveret asleep. They are joyfully reunited, and the king restores to Bisclaveret his lands, while also banishing the wife and her new husband. Maggie tells us that the latter pair had several daughters in their day, all of whom were born lacking noses. Maggie ends her lay insisting that this story is true and that it is immortalized in the lay. So that's the summary. Obviously, as you can see, this story is just bizarre and quite hilarious when you think about it. I mean, like, he bites her nose off. He is a werewolf. Like, as I said before, you're going to look at this book and be like, oh my gosh, this looks so boring. But when you actually like read these stories, they're very interesting. So what I would like to do now is I would like to sort of talk through what I had to do as an essay question. So I was looking at several of these stories and linking them together, but we're just going to focus on Bisclaveret. So an essay question that I had to answer was discuss the role of animals and the non-human in the lay. And in this question, I did speak about Bisclaveret, the story, and the role of Bisclaveret, the werewolf. And basically, you have to ask yourself, what is the significance of this character? And what makes what he does important? What does it show? So basically, now you're probably thinking, how does this essay question of animals and the non-human link in with homosexuality and homoeroticism? And we're going to look at this now. So first of all, if you don't know, homoeroticism is basically concerning or arousing sexual desire centered on a person of the same sex. So pretty much the same as homosexuality. So what I'd like to do now is go to the lay itself and look at an extract and pick out some things that might lead us to these ideas of homosexuality. So I don't know if any of this story sort of brought to mind anything to do with homosexuality, but we're going to have a look at an extract now. So this is an extract that we have from the poem, the one on the left. So this one here on the left, this is directly from the lay. It is in Old French. So if you're thinking this does not look like French, it's in Old French. Don't stress about that at all, because in the copy I have, there's the exact French, like normal French translation next to it, and then I've searched up the summary of it, so I have a gist for the story anyway, so don't worry about it being in Old French. I've put the English next to it. So I've taken out an extract from this is just after Bisclaveret has become a man again, and to just put this extract in context, he is lying in the bed. So lying in the bed, the king runs over, gives him loads of kisses and hugs, and they share this moment together. So the king ran to embrace him. More than 100 times he hugs and kisses him. As soon as he got a chance, he gave him back all his land. He gave him more than I'm telling you. Dun dun dun. So the bit that I've highlighted here is plus de 120, or more than 100 times in English. What does this really mean? So if you have a look at that, plus de 120, more than 100 times, that is a use of hyperbole or exaggeration. Obviously, they didn't kiss 100 times in that very second. So clearly, the author, Maggie, is emphasizing the fact that they kissed. She wants to put a focus on that to bring out this sort of romantic side of the relationship between the king and Bisclavre. So, what I'm basically saying is that there is some homoerotic tension or homosexual tension between Bisclavre, the werewolf, and the king. And I think that this really shows it by saying that the king ran to embrace him more than 100 times. He hugs and kisses him. The Marie de France is emphasizing the fact that there's this sort of homosexual tension between them, and bringing out the romantic side of their relationship. So obviously, Marie de France couldn't openly say this was a homosexual relationship, because that just was not condoned in the 12th century, homosexuality. So she's sort of done it in a very subtle way, by this use of hyperbole, really emphasizing the romantic over the friendship between them. So you see how you can get quite a lot from like one little phrase. I hope you guys can see where I'm coming from when I say this. This whole like kissing him loads, it's like clearly more than friends, And then another part of this extract, we have he gave him more than I'm telling you. Plus li duna que j'ai dit. So I think I wanted to sort of highlight this because when you're analyzing literature, what the author doesn't write is just as important as what they do write. So when Marie de France is saying he gave him more than I'm telling you, dun dun dun, it is a bit like of a cliffhanger. It's like, well, come on, what? Like what? So in a way, the author is sort of luring us in with this. If we have a look at this more than 100 times, he hugs and kisses him. That's hyperbole. That's exaggeration. So the author's luring us in with this use of exaggeration in the first part of this extract, and then contrasting it with refusing to tell us any more about what went on between the king and Bisclavre. And this sort of he gave him more than I'm telling you, this sort of hiding the truth almost, is very representative of this forbidden relationship that Bisclavre and the king share. What Marie is doing here is she is allowing the reader to imagine what happens next. She's leaving it to our imagination. And by doing that, by saying he gave him more than I'm telling you, by luring us in, she is making us active readers. We have to finish the story ourselves in a way. And that is very interesting. And like, think about the context of this passage as well. So set the scene in your head. He's lying in this big, luxurious bed, and the king's running over, bending over him and kissing him. Bisclavre is in a very vulnerable and exposed position. It is very intimate. And this sort of vulnerability of his positioning in the bed very much contrasts with his beastly physicality, in his werewolf form. And in a way, we can think of it as if this fur and this werewolf form provides an armor for his homosexual desire, which is forbidden. It provides an armor for him, almost a new persona. In wolf form, he can almost fulfill his homosexual relationship with the king because he does have this armor protecting him. So as you can see, when you just read like even just a few lines, it is very interesting to see how it sort of links in with homosexuality. And I hope you guys can see that as well, because it is very interesting. And sort of returning back to the question and homosexuality, I would argue that the author uses animals and the non-human to present the forbidden and often homosexual relationships going on behind the scenes of the display of courtly love. So although on the surface these lays are about courtly love, in fact there's much more complicated themes going on behind the scenes. And so another really interesting example, not in this lay, but in another one. So there's a creature in one of the poems, which is sort of like a deer, but sort of not. It's like a really big deer, and it's like glowing white, and it has both female and male genitals, which is really interesting because this could be sort of illustrating problems with gender identity and transgenderism. And it's very interesting. And like, we have to remember this piece, these lay were written a very, very long time ago. Yet the themes and issues that we have just been looking at now are so important in today's world, and they're, every day prevailing more and more. And that's what I sort of really like about doing MML, is because you can make links between the literature you study, and the current affairs going on. And you can even do this like in your oral classes. Like, I know right now, if any of you are doing French and Spanish, your speaking might be your dreaded nightmare, which is fair enough. But it does get a lot better because you can talk about things you're really interested in. You can say, "Oh, I want to discuss this," and you can discuss that. And it's just a lot more interesting because you can actually talk about things that matter rather than like, "Oh, I play sport with my friends. My mum is called Sarah." It does get a lot better. So, just a few concluding remarks. I hope that you enjoyed the example I chose, and it wasn't too daunting seeing the medieval French. Really, don't worry about that. But like, just like think about this for a second. This is a woman writing in the 12th century. How amazing is that? And she's addressing issues of gender and homosexuality before these issues even became issues. And that is really interesting. And about the old French, don't worry about that. This is something that you're taught, and you really don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's just like a couple of lectures on it, and then you can sort of drop it if you don't want to carry on with it. But it is very interesting, and medieval French is not too different from normal French. I would just like to say, though, I know this text we didn't really look at sort of the history because there's not really much. Well, there is a lot to say in the 12th century, but it was so long ago. But if you look at the texts such as Le Père Goriot, you can really look at like Napoleon and sort of industrial growth, and stuff like that, which is really interesting. So, if you are interested in history, you can make some links with that, which is good. So don't stress about that. You can bring history into it if that's something that you really want to focus on. But I think what I want to say is, if I can go back to the reading list page here. Yeah, so like what I wanted to sort of say from this is, looking at the reading list is horrible, but once you study these things, they become more and more interesting, and you can really delve into areas that sort of spark your interest, such as like feminism, colonialism, love, war, politics. So like, really don't stress. Like, if you are considering applying to Cambridge, if you enjoy languages, if you have the ability, like, do it, because don't let the reading list, or don't let the thought that maybe it's like not as interesting or fun, don't let that put you off, because I can definitely say, like, initially I didn't want to go to Cambridge, and I really didn't want to go to Cambridge at all, because when I went to the open day, I was like, this just looks so boring. And honestly, biggest regret of my life was initially turning down Cambridge, but I'm so happy that I turned it around and accepted the offer again. And I have to say, like, I didn't realize how interesting the course was until I got here. I didn't think I'd enjoy the course, and the only thing that made me go was the knowing that it was like the best uni for my degree. So like, please don't let that put you off. And I know that the university doesn't necessarily advertise the interesting parts of the degree as much, but trust me, like, if you're considering it, just do it, because you will really be able to study some amazing things. And I'm only speaking about French here, but Spanish, it's the exact same. A lot of focus on colonialism, really interesting. I don't know about the other languages. Um, but yeah, so obviously there are lots of different texts here, because the aim of first year is to get like a wide picture. So you can then in second year narrow down on areas that interest you. The course is really not all about grammar and boring French books. It's really um, extremely important to like nowadays, and allows you to really delve in. So really, like, don't stress. And I hope this was useful, and I hope it sort of unboggled a few things for you. Um, but thank you so much for watching. I will try and there we go. Thank you so much. And if you are considering it, just do it. Like, you will not regret it. There's like no harm in trying. There's just no harm in trying. What do you have to lose? So thank you so much. If you need anything, I don't know if I'm allowed to put my email, so I won't. But just ask anything, ask anyone. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. And if you didn't, if like, sort of homosexuality and stuff like that isn't really up your street, that's fine. But there are loads of other things that you can do. I just thought I'd do that one. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and have a lovely day.